And I would have probably just jumped up and down and run away. So the first few slides are basically to outline the philosophy of what we do and the problem that we're trying to solve. So we're working in a complex system there, and you'll see we define it quite different from biologists. So our problem in Africa is we end up with things like radicalization and migration, as you see in West Africa. Collapse of society, people move, they pick up AK-47s and whatever. And if you trace that down, it comes to social problems and poverty and population growth. It all comes to ecological decline. And if you trace that further down, it basically comes down to the lack of institutions, lack of property rights, rule of law, etc., etc. And if you trace that further down, comes to a colonial history of dispossession and violence, etc., etc. So, including in conservation, and I'll go through that quickly just now. So, therefore, to solve conservation problems, we have to go into deep history to solve these issues. And where we are working is we've got a stagnation of the wildlife economy, really well to $3 billion. It should be at $30 billion because I'll show you data to show that. And we've got the decay of concepts, capacities, and systems, particularly as the big donors and the big NGOs have come in. Short-term projects, sells nicely in Washington, doesn't work on the ground. Our communities are so upset because everybody's raising money in the name of IPLCs, business people, local community, and none of their money gets in. I've had that all in my class, and that really irritates them. And I've even saw that at the IUCN forum because I'm a counsellor. People have started to question the delivery by the big NGOs. Maybe I should also ask about the. There's an opportunity for us there, but we're getting very expensive. And to deal with that, I'll talk about this more. We're focusing on capacity, and the capacity is linked to education and knowledge, which I'll talk about, research, particularly on governance, new ways of financing the environment, and then also learning networks, which we manage a few. Our two big rocks for changing the system are making money out of wildlife and getting the governance so the money goes right down to the bottom. And our goal is to get to a $30 billion wildlife economy. So we go from 10 million to 100 million animals. We've already gone from 1 million to 10 million with recovery. Now we want to get to 100 million. Have a lot of communities work. I'll show you a map just now and conserve and get to 30 by 30, even 50 by 30, because 50% of us are drylands. And we also need to measure jobs, taxes, GDP, added value, all these variables. And we're trying to build resilient communities because these communities out there are not resilient. They're so vulnerable. Like in Mozambique, we had an insurgency 4 years ago where I worked. So what's happening in West Africa and the Horn could easily spread elsewhere. There's some seats here if you guys want. You won't disturb me. So we have that that's our overall strategy. It comes back to the history of conservation. I mean, very sort of stereotypical here. So when white people ran the Industrial Revolution and they spread out from Europe around the world, they arrived to large amounts of wildlife. North America, India, Africa, there was no problem. But then there tended to be the destruction of local communities. And more than that, the loss of institutions. So the Great Lakes, native people, their beaver management tools or institutions were broken. Africans were not allowed to use their wildlife. So people were distanced from wildlife, and wildlife disappeared. And then the people who'd done the damage said, oh, it's a tragedy of the commons. What's happening is everybody's coming in and taking all the wildlife because doesn't know there was no institutions, but it's disappearing. We better take control of this. And they set up relatively highly centralized public conservation, particularly starting people like Roosevelt and so on. And the people that protected the wildlife was the state through policing, not the local communities anymore. And they saw markets as a threat. And people, who thinks trading ivory is a good thing? Who thinks safari hunting is a good thing? You see, you're all in that cultural box, completely in that cultural box that comes out of this. And as a result, we have top-down conservation, which tends to be against the people. We get green militarization. I'm exaggerating a little bit here. Massive biodiversity funding gap. because we're all trying to do biodiversity in other people's back gardens. We don't differentiate between working lands where people live and protected areas and so on. So in Southern Africa, I don't know why we changed, but we looked at this problem of the tragedy of the commons and said, well, the solution might not be public management, it might be local communities and farmers. So solve the problem of open access by closing access and devolving property rights and capacity and rights of exclusion. So they gave the wildlife back to the farmers and the people. Wildlife became valuable, and we had a massive recovery of wildlife in Southern Africa. And linked to that, we see markets as good. We want to trade ivory, we want to hunt lions, we want to trade rhino horn. We fight for that, and we're sort of we're very marginalized, even though our wildlife is increasing rapidly. So we have different paradigms and different cultures of the way we look at wildlife. I'm never quite sure which. So what the Western culture, I was talking about in my class there, we come out of Egypt, Rome, England, America, and we love domestic species. We like wheat, and we like corn, and we like sheep, and we like goats, and we like cattle. And we push these into these complex, so we take simple domestic systems, and we shove them into complex drylands and complex forests. So there's an ecological mismatch. At the same time, the terms of trade for farming is going down. We used to make money out of farming. You don't make money out of farming anymore unless you're huge and you externalize most of your costs. Yet all the donors, all the NGOs are still promoting agriculture. The EU and the US, their agricultural subsidy is 16 times the foreign aid bill. So we're still massively subsidizing agriculture. So in Africa, people like my father said, well, we're the only continent with all species left. This is an economic opportunity. Let's see if we can make money out of wildlife. And what they found is that you can, through, not so much for me, commodity production, what we figured out, it's really hard to produce commodities in between drylands and marginal environments, because if you try and produce more meat, you destroy your environment because you're overgrazing, etc. So this system was stuck and broken. All the farmers were going bankrupt. 95% of cattle, white cattle farmers in Zimbabwe were not profitable. So they saved themselves by switching mainly to hunting, because they had a few animals that could make a lot of money, a bit of money out of hunting, and they switched from cattle to more and more wildlife, and then they sold meat, and then they did tourism, and through that process, we've got 15,000 wildlife properties in Southern Africa, plus or minus. Because wildlife's multifunctional, it's not selling commodity, it's selling outdoor recreation, it's selling photographs, it's selling food, wine, etc., etc. Produces much more out of the environment. It's a bio-experience economy as opposed to a commodity economy. And then we looked at the data, and what you can see, in South Africa, for example, cattle are earning $17 per hectare, but a mixed game farm where you sell some live animals, you do a bit of meat, you do hunting, you do tourism, they normally earn somewhere between $20 and $60 or $70. Tourism can earn a huge amount in the right place. It's next to Kruger or Vic Falls. But this promotion of thinking tourism can replace doesn't work, because in most places you can't do tourism. No one wants to go there, there's no roads, there's no food. And so about 70% of wildland in Southern Africa is funded by hunting. And that's controversial, but hunting has superpower. I'm not a hunter, although my students that were shooting rifles have become killers, haven't they? You haven't been indoctrinated yet.
I've shot a gun before. I like it.
But if you have a herd or a population of animals like this, in hunting you take off the two biggest or the two oldest, and that makes the same amount of money as eating 50% of the wildlife. So that means not only, so then what you get here is you get lots of young animals, you have two bulls, you really truncate the production system, becomes very unnatural. Whereas here you have to have a natural system where you never get the adult males. So hunting it earns much more from less, and it also forces you to have natural populations, manage environment properly, and so on. So people hate hunting for cultural reasons, but economic and ecological reasons. It really is a powerful tool for rewilding and for rewilding people as well, because I don't hunt, but I love being out in the bush with that sort of thing. So if we look at the economics, that's what a game farm makes, a white commercial private game farm. And that's what a cattle farm makes. So you'll see on the future slides, lots of people have switched from there. But this is what communities are making. And so we're working on saying, how do we get these circles bigger? Because the black people are still greatly disadvantaged by their own leaders. So essentially what we're doing in Africa is trying to, this is what we call a policy heuristic. It's the mental model that we have to make decisions. So we know from data that wildlife, if it was left to compete in the marketplace, can outcompete farming and livestock in dry areas. In wet areas, you've got to farm. Farming makes more money. But in drylands, probably in forests, natural intact systems create more value for us. But we can't create the value because we don't have property rights. Because you can't trade. Trade creates worth. Trade creates value. If I eat a buffalo in Africa, it's worth $500. If I sell the same buffalo to America, it's worth $10,000. You think of anything. Trade takes the same item and makes it worth much more. So trade is a value creating. It creates more from less. And then we have to sort out the regulations and taxes and subsidies, because if you want to sell a wild animal, you normally have to go to 16 departments and have 30 permits. With livestock, you're fine, because essentially people controlling wildlife tend to be a bit control freaky, and they put all sorts of restrictions on you. And then when you sell your animal, they say, well, no, you have to pay us $1,000 or $5,000 to sell a buffalo to government, but cows you don't. Does that Ministry of Agriculture charge trophy fee for cows? No. So we still have a lot of old-fashioned constraints on making wildlife profitable. So we're fiddling around, knocking these up all the time, because the higher we can push the value curve of wildlife, the bigger the wildlife area grows. So that's what we have in our mind. I put a lot of bump here, but I'm not going to use it all. So the next thing is communities. I'm going to have one theoretical slide on communities. People, they see a community as a bunch of black people sitting in one place. But communities have structure. And what tends to happen is the big NGOs and whatever work with a committee that represents a lot of people. Committees are quite good at managing wildlife and selling concessions and that sort of thing. But they're really bad at the social capital, at participation, equitable benefit sharing, because the committee will spend all the money on itself. I'll show you a little data on that. So we are trying to rebuild the social fabric of Southern Africa, East Africa, which has been destroyed by the slave trade, colonialism, post-colonialism, big NGOs, donors. These people have been hammered. And so to rebuild social capital, we work at this level. And to do that, we have standard procedures. And so we basically reconstitute communities so they're face-to-face. Ostrom, Murphy, etc., all talk about face-to-face communities. Almost every single project completely ignores that knowledge base, and they work with committees. So we say we're trying to go from committee to community. I'm not going to go through all of that. And the other thing is we try to measure what we do. If you look in business, they've got ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria. So we've added E because systems are complicated. And every time we work in a system, we want to know what's its economic impact, household, community, nation, in terms of reinvestment in the wildlife resource or the nature and so on. We also want to work and look at environment, starting with the bottom of the trophic pyramid, because everyone studies lions and nobody looks at the soil or the grass or the trees or the fire or anything like that. And we also we use wildlife, so we want to know if it's sustainable. Actually, our biggest problem is too much, often not too little. Resource protection, anti-poaching, and so on. And then people like Aaron are working on what is social, what is governance, what variables are these? The literature on this is actually relatively weak. And are there relationships between good governance, rebuilding social capital, whether people like wildlife and so on? So that's our kind of metrics that we use behind everything that we do. And these are sort of questions that we're looking at. Is wildlife, should be wildlife or nature, more valuable than domestic or converted habitat? Intuitively, yes. And probably in many places, Amazon, Congo Basin, savannas of Africa, drylands, the tundra, wild systems are more profitable. So why isn't this translating into land use decisions? What do we need to do about this? And why isn't this a question academics are dealing with? There's almost nothing on this in the literature. But that's our question. So how do we turn the inherent value of nature back into nature and livelihood and so on? And then linked to that, is higher education fit for purpose? What purpose? And I said this a big, why are we not solving these problems? There's so many of us doing so much good work. And nature and poverty is going up, nature's going down in places where I live. So where's the disconnect? So I showed you this program. So our core business is building capacity. And so we run 3 courses, which I'll explain briefly. But we integrate our teaching into, obviously, research. And I'll show you a few examples of that. Even more into practice. Because when I first was a young biologist or ecologist or whatever, my boss told me that you can research a Land Rover by studying it from the outside, or you can try and drive the Land Rover. Which way are you going to find out more about it? So it's better to get in the vehicle and try and make it work. Get in the community, try and make it work. Study by doing. And then we look at how do we change the capital flow into using ESG criteria, and then networking with policymakers, donors, whatever. I'm going to talk about a couple of those. I'm just going to give you a few examples of those 3 with my students, who play an incredible role. So we've got 3 levels of education that we're doing, or 2, still got to do the 3rd one. So we run this half online course. We identify good people we work for in the field, from Kenya to South Africa. We give them 2 online courses for a full semester, like a 6,000 level course. Then we take them in the field. That helps us build a constituency. So wherever we go, we have friends and colleagues and whatever. And this has been, it's like a loss leader in terms of research and fundraising. It's been incredible. And I mean, I'm still working with, there's Alex, working with a lot of these people in the field. So now this is a really complicated diagram, but it's not really. So we're working in the field and we're finding good people that we then take through our certificate course, mostly from communities. But now we're starting to experiment, and I'll show you some of these by actually working with communities. So some of these best people we found, we've got 32 fellowships at the University of Stellenbosch, and they can now manage their community site or maybe their wildlife economy project and get rewarded and get data by running that through the master's program in Africa, which is less than 1/12 of the cost. In fact, I think it's less than 1/20 of the cost of the, I mean, just seen that. So we're linking field to online training, to giving people a career trajectory through a master's, and of course they can then go on to a PhD. And the 3rd thing is when you work in communities, we have this framework. So we go into a community, we say, can you make the community viable? Can it make money? Carbon, wildlife, whatever. Can you do proper governance, or is the chief or the chairman going to steal all the money? And is there someone to support it? So the whole feasibility side. Then you've got to change management often. So if the chairman and the chief have got a lockhold on the money, can you unlock it? Or if the government people are feasting on the poor people, can you change it? So if you can, you do. And we look at stuff like we do social mapping and dashboards and try to understand the people. I'll go there a bit further. And then we run a whole lot of implementation stuff, like how do you make money, business, contracting, quota setting, and so on. Governance is our main thing. How do you set up a governance program? And natural resource protection is what almost everybody focuses on. But we're also finding security and safety, especially working in a post-conflict country like Mozambique. If people are not secure and safe, you can't do anything. So we're fiddling around with that. And then I've just put the enabling environment at the top there. And we don't really understand that yet. But each of these has 1 or 2 or 3 modules. And we're setting up a system whereby people living in the field can do basic understanding or do an exam. And maybe we can film. We teach Australia. They teach students by filming and having a mentor in the office and using tech. And so can we now check their field abilities as well as their academic abilities? So we're trying to develop what we call micro-accreditation, working with the Community Leaders Network, which is a network of all the communities in Southern East Africa. So that ordinary people living in the field who have no credentials at all, these NGOs are employing lots of people who are really good, no training, no skills, no specific skills. We can give them a trajectory to develop skills. So maybe this guy's a governance guy, that guy's an economics guy, that guy's a journalist, and they can build a career. It's like a scorecard for their career. So we're putting those 3 bits. That should be first, but it's actually last because it's the hardest to do. So that's the education side. So now we do a lot of research on wildlife economy because we don't make money and we don't understand the policy. You don't have an engine to drive your communities. So there's Alex. These are the sort of thing that Alex does. So everyone says tourism is going to save wildlife. That's where tourism is in Africa. Most of these other areas here are paid for by hunting. So just simple graphics, you can tell it doesn't work. Here we're doing a lot of economics and finances of protected areas. How much is a protected area worth? This one's worth $38 million. It's South Orangwa. Government gives it $3 million to manage. US parks are worth 300 billion. Government gives them 30 billion to manage. So there's big disconnect between the economic value of parks and the financing amount and also the financial management. I'm not even going to get into management. So we're trying to understand how the values and finance work in protected areas. Then we're also developing tools for managing. This is Niassa. This is 60,000 square kilometers. I'm going to talk about Luiri. Where are the animals hunted? What's the quality of the animals over time? Is the quality getting higher? Is it low? These are interactive tools. I think I've got a few more on the next slide. It goes there. So Alex has developed, I'll get to that. So one of the problems what happens to money in communities? How much do they earn and what do they do with it? So for Namibia and many of the other countries, we've got a database. We can take this community and we can see how much is spent in the committee, how much goes to the people. We can also look at their tourism enterprise or their hunting enterprise. And we can look at the average and we can see that these guys have got a good deal. They're getting paid enough. But if you're these communities, you're not getting paid enough. And Namibia is well managed, so most of them get paid about 8% of tourism and about 30% of hunting. But in other countries, people are getting paid way less. So we can use this to help communities negotiate much higher prices. And then we're looking at like, what's the return per hectare? So we've got state land's getting about $2, communal land's getting $1. Here, this is Zimbabwe. Big private areas are getting $7 a hectare, and it's highly variable. It's a messed up country, it's where I come from. But we've got data like that from the country, so we can see who's performing, who's not performing. Vincent, my finished master's student, he went to Namibia, and we started looking at wildlife economics. So these are cattle, that's hunting, that's tourism. And what we can see here is no one in cattle is making money. Hunting, some people are making a lot. Most of them are making $20 a hectare, and some are not. So why are these people not making? Can we help them? Obviously, cattle people are stuck. There's no way out of your environmental. If you can't break the trap that for every kg of beef you produce, you've got to eat 20 kgs of grass. You can't break that. So you're totally environmentally limited. Whereas when you move to wildlife, you're not environmentally limited. You can do lots of other things. And we're just looking at the economics. And what you can see in between 1990 and 2020, when you did his research, livestock properties done that, and wildlife properties have done that. But we still have a lot of wildlife properties that are not flipping, they're not transforming. We want to know why. And what policy constraints can we undo to make wildlife even more? In fact, I was talking to wildlife ranching in Namibia this morning. So we try to work with the producer or the associations. So our research is linked to the associations. Mostly we work with Community Leaders Network, that's Black communities, because that's where our biggest passion is. But we also work with the white farmers, and slowly, we try to bring the two together in a post-apartheid situation. It's not doing too bad, actually. There's our one black guy, Nabot, our big buddy. And these are two UF undergrad students. She's a South African, he's a South African, there's me and Alex. So we take the students in the field for 10, 15 days, train them, and let them go and collect data, connect them up. So that's economic stuff. Oh, whoops. And that's the slide that Mary and Patrick put together. We can't see them, but that's basically says the same thing. So that's the commercial side. Governance is probably our main interest, community governance. So we run a process where we get invited to work in communities, often through our classrooms and so on. Then we go into community and see, is it viable, which I talked to. Is it going to make money? Is it not? Is it going to be honest? Is there someone to support it? We then run a dashboard, which is I'll explain the dashboard. It's a monitoring tool, an impact monitoring tool. So we can measure the community now, we can measure it in 5 years or 2 years or 10 years. We use financial revenue distribution to create change. So I'll explain that now. And then the people managing this now become master students. And so we then turn this big experiment into knowledge. That's Namibia.
I think when your mouse is over, we're good now. Right now.
Oh, they will work now. Thank you. So we're not working with the richest people in the world. These are Nama pastoralists in Western Namibia in the desert. 7 years of drought these poor people have had. Impact of climate change and drought. Really, really struggling. So the way our dashboard works, this is mainly our dashboard, but we've got the structure of society or community. So we've got the wildlife here, we monitor the wildlife. In the communities, we're the first people for 25 years to go and ask ordinary people if the programs are working. The NGOs just work at this level. So we look at their livelihoods, their demographics, their production, their nutrition, schools, clinics, health, etc., etc. Then we look at their governance, and then we look at their wildlife, their tolerance to wildlife. And we haven't got these tools working. See how close is that to the Ostrom principles, and then what enabling environment you need things to work. But that's in the future, looking at the big. We're starting at the bottom. So there's Aaron, Tierney, that's Nabot again, big Nabot. And we had 34 people from 9 countries working together in Namibia, training them to do a dashboard. And we did a dashboard, we did a survey, N equals 303 days after training. In those 3 communities, there's the data, N equals 253 actually. And we looked at household production. I didn't put all that data, but what we're finding is even people who think they're farmers are getting less than 20% of their income from farming. I'm not going to belabor that point. And then we look at governance. Who do you trust? Do you trust your traditional leadership, your conservancy, going up to national government? And these are 3 communities in Namibia, and that's a 30% trust line. So these communities don't trust anybody for historical reasons. They were enslaved, they were colonized, they were shoved around by NGOs, whatever. So very low level of general trust and social capital. So then we look at, do they like their institutions? I'll just put one of like 20 questions. So do you trust your conservancy leaders with money? And we use the dashboard red. We call them robots in Southern Africa, traffic lights. Red, orange, and green. You can see there's not a very high level of trust. These are some of the better communities, actually. Then we, especially with Alex, we get all their finances. And so you can see this community is a good one. Quite a lot of the money goes to people, but it's getting smaller. This is all money that they use in admin and salaries and allowances and in management costs. So most, I think in many communities, less than 7% of the benefits are getting to people. This is about 25%. And if you look at the budget compared to expenditure, you'll find things are high, except community benefits at the end of the year. They always forget to pay the community because it's a committee that the committee's funding the committee and all the brothers and sisters in cars and not really thinking about the community. It's a scale issue. If you ask them if they like wildlife, so this is a community where there's heaps of elephants and buffaloes and whatever. Wildlife's very harmful, and wildlife's also beneficial. I think 50% of this community had elephants in the field that year. So that's mashy. Then you say, but is wildlife important to your future? Look what they say. Isn't that amazing? And the reason is not that they're getting benefits. Leander wrote a paper about that. It's because people are respecting them and they have some form of ownership over the wildlife, and they're forming institutions around. So it's for reasons of identity and institutions that they like wildlife, and also money, and also because rural people like wildlife. We assume that they don't. We misread these people really badly. So they like wildlife a lot, even though the elephants are in 50% of their fields every year. Quite amazing. So we feed. So now how do we fix the problem? So we get that data and we take it back to the community like this. So you'll see red, green, and red, orange, green, and red. And you'll see they're earning less than they should be. Can't see that there. And we see governance is weak and they're almost getting no benefits, yet they like wildlife. And wildlife has recovered. There were 1,000 of one species of antelope. Now there's 25,000 in that community, in the Kwando in Namibia. So you use that and you stir up that they become dissatisfied with the status quo. So now you can create change. And we sat as the support agencies from all over Africa, and we said, actually, we're the problem. They've got weaknesses in governance. We don't know about governance. They've got weaknesses in economics. We don't know about economics. So anyone been trained in governance? Any of you? No. Any of you been trained in economics? No. The massive knowledge gap that we're trying to deal with there. So now we've analyzed that community, which is quite a good one. And we started to do change management in Luwiri in northern Mozambique. Who's been to Luwiri? 1, 2, 3. So we spent 16 days there. It's a massive area. Depends primarily on hunting, and has got 1,200 households, something like that. So I brought together 3 US students, MDP and Jessica, and 9 Africans from 5 countries. And the first thing we did, we trained the trainers in how to do institutional reform using revenue distribution. And then we took them and they trained the communities. You guys speak Portuguese, you can read that, I can't. And this is kind of, we're doing budgets. So we taught them how to do a constitution, how to do a budget, how to do project management, and so on. So we started off doing a role play, and we said, what happens to money? So we started off reading these bloody long constitutions, and we all fell asleep ourselves. So then we thought, well, why don't we act it out? So we tore off leaves from a mango tree and said, we shot John. He said he's a buffalo and he does this dying motion. And he has the money. What happens to the money? It goes to the government. Where does the money go? I'm not sure. 20% goes to the committee. What does the committee do? And they all walked over and they took one leaf and they put the other leaf in the back pocket. And so we knew that there's major dysfunction there. So we role play that, and then we role play the new system, which is we take the money, we share it amongst everybody. Everybody gets equal share, whatever you decide what to do with it. I'll show you some pictures on that. And here we're doing a budgeting exercise. What do you want to do with your money? I never know if this works or not because I downloaded these slides, these films, and they didn't work. And on my computer, they started working, and now they're not working. Sorry?
Click on one of.
Oh.
We could play button over to the left. There, right? Oh, wait, no, never mind. It's not a play button. I lied. Oh,
It actually works. It took 3 days to download. So everybody's coming up and getting their cash?
Yeah.
That's you. Talk about oral, I mean verbal and oral communication. So they mark her finger with a pen so she can sign because it's a post-conflict situation. No one's got any education. And here's the old man, the chief, symbolically receiving money on behalf of the community. Don't know if this one works. We've got hours of this stuff if you want to look at it. So anyway, it's quite dramatic, isn't it? Everyone gets excited. These are the same pictures. So it didn't work. So money goes to community. Everybody comes up, gets their share, and they then sign it. And then communities where their projects have put it in a bucket or whatever, and so on. So they're basically acting on their budgets. And then we use that process to do the constitution. So we take the acting and we turn that into a short document, a long document. And now we have to set up financial systems and project management systems. And so I don't see George and Ilda. There they are. So these are the two managers. Now what I'm doing is I'm training them how to use those techniques. And Aaron and I are putting it in the micro-accreditation training. So how do you run a constitution? How do you do this? How do you do that? Little 2-3 day training courses to help these people. Because we train the main guys, but there's a lot of field people that want to know what's happening. And then my students have to do some work. So here's Jennifer trying to look at what impact did that money make in the community. Did the men get more? Did the women get more? What did they spend it on? Did it stay in the community? Did it go out the community? Did it create a sense of empowerment or disempowerment? Did they like the process? 100% like the process compared to the old process. And so now I'm using Jennifer to do a tool to do a post-revenue distribution analysis so we can understand impact, because it's not just money, it's empowerment, it's women's empowerment, it's knowledge, it's getting the economy going, because now Bailey's also counting like the shops. I bet you that there are 3 shops and next year there'll be 5 shops because the money's not circulating in the community. We want to monitor all that sort of stuff. So that's what Jennifer did. And Bailey did a lot of PRA looking at the history of the community. And how do you use land? And a historical timeline like this. We had a war, we were killed, this happened, there's an insurgency, because you need to understand that to understand where people come from. So, and then Jessica is trying to, that's a tough place to work there. I mean, it's a stunning, stunning place. So Jessica is now trying to work out how do we measure global public goods, environmental public goods. Is it trees? Is it carbon? Is it water? What about the patrolling that happens? And she's using the patrol scouts to collect data, etc., etc. So we're trying to, that's our measuring our E variable, the second E variable. I think I'm nearly done. So how much effort does it take and what does it cost? So I just added up last year. I spent $56,000 directly on students. And thank you to TCD and Geography and African Studies for about 15,000 of that. But I had to use about 140, I found 140,000 to bring Africans in to participate. Like in Namashasha, where we trained them in the dashboard, the 9 that we took to the Wiri, and so on. So it's not a cheap program. It's more than my salary. So I have to convince the higher ups. And I spent 40 days in the field with students. And I reckon organizing it takes double. Making sure that people, their vehicles, their airplanes, whatever, you've developed relationships. So it's quite expensive in terms of time and money. And it's not appreciated by, I don't think, it doesn't come out as IDC. So it's a problem for the university. I'm going to wrap up in the next 2 slides. So in terms of scale, we started in Luwiri. We're going now to do one community in Kenya, then another one later in the year. Then we're doing Botswana. We've got communities getting ready in Namibia, Angola, Zambia, and one in Zimbabwe, and we're not sure about Kenya. Tanzania. And each of these has master students in them. And we're helping. My students do an amazing job setting the framework, but their job, their masters, is to make the program work. And so essentially, and Alex put this together, it's a really good diagram. So it's quite a lot of Southern Africa. But I estimated it's about 20 to 40 million hectares at least. It's about 500 communities. So I put here, we don't know anything about community governance. Our hypothesis is if we drop it from the committee to the people, we have all sorts of EESG benefits, whatever they are. And so we set up anchor sites in 8 countries. We've got baseline data. We work with them on a work plan. We distribute revenue. How do you manage your wildlife? How do you manage people? What about your projects and so on? Then we have impact data, and we have people measuring the process. How many people come to meetings as a man and this is a woman, etc., etc. And not only do we do, and the reason we're focusing on these anchor sites is in many of these countries, there's an association. So how do we build the capacity of the association? So in Botswana, the association is based there. We use the anchor sites to develop the systems that then become the association central systems. And so we developed it because the donors and governments are neglecting these communities. They're raising money and they're not helping them. So we're starting right from the bottom to try and rebuild them. Okay, I'm going to stop there.